Hello, 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 and welcome once again to CorpusCast. It's episode 19. Can you believe it? Since launching in January of 2022, here we are, episode 19, and I'm sure it's going to be a really, really fun and interesting conversation. As ever, I'm your host, Robbie Love, and I'm a linguist at Aston University. You're listening to the podcast all about corpus linguistics and what it can do for society. Now, as you know by now, in each episode, I'll be interviewing one or more researchers to find out how corpus linguistics is informing the present and shaping the future of the study of language with applications in education, health, technology, and many others. In today's episode, we'll be asking some quite big questions. Who are we and where do we come from? How has human civilization changed or not changed across history? And how does it vary around the world? What makes our social structures work? And how do diverse groups of people maintain a peaceful community? Our topic is anthropology, the study of the origin and development of human societies and cultures. I'll be speaking with two guests today, one an anthropologist and the other, of course, a corpus linguist, to discuss their work together on a research project that explored how members of different religious groups in southwest Nigeria got on with each other peacefully. To tell us about this, firstly, is the project's principal investigator, Insa Nolte, Professor of African Studies and Head of the Department of African Studies and Anthropology at the University of Birmingham, just down the road from us at Aston. Insa's research focuses on the role of everyday life for the political and religious history of the Yoruba-speaking Southwest of Nigeria. And Insa has published research extensively on this topic, often reporting on interdisciplinary collaborations such as the project we're discussing in this episode. Insa is former president of the African Studies Association of the UK, which aims to support and strengthen connections between UK and African institutions and academics. Joining Insa today is Dr. Clyde Ancarno, senior lecturer in applied linguistics and education at King's College London. Clyde's research interests involve applying methods from corpus linguistics and discourse analysis in interdisciplinary contexts, and Clyde has published on topics including multilingual education, identity and peaceful relations, and the natural world. She is co-organizer of the Corpus Research in Linguistics and Beyond seminar series at King's College London, and she is on the committee of the Corpus Linguistics Special Interest Group for the British Association for Applied Linguistics. So, with all that said, I'll waste no more time in introducing our two guests for today's episode on anthropology, Clyde and Insa. Please welcome them into the recording. If you're watching us here in video on YouTube, you'll see they've just appeared now. Insa and Clyde, welcome to CorpusCast.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, thank you so much. Yes, we're here and we're ready to go. And I've got so much that I want to ask both of you. And Insa, I will get to you in a moment. But as is tradition on CorpusCast, I do start with a couple of questions about corpus linguistics, which you'll be relieved to hear I will direct towards Clyde to begin with. So Clyde, hello. Thank you so much for joining us. And I want to start by asking you, Clyde, a question that guests have found to be challenging a little bit. What does corpus linguistics mean to you?
The first word that comes to my mind is novelty. So I know it's going to sound a little bit surprising maybe to some of your listeners, but what I mean by novelty is novelty 25 years back. So picture me doing a BA in English at the University of Nantes in France, and back then, I mean, discourse analysis was controversial. On the BA I was doing, there were three pathways: so literature, civilization, and linguistics, and I chose linguistics. And we were lucky to be introduced to corpus linguistics as part of this pathway. And that, within the context of otherwise being mostly exposed to structuralist approaches to language, at the time, that was completely novel, and it really allowed for different way of exploring language data. So yes, novelty would be my what I would associate with your question there.
So, in terms of how you came to use corpus methods in your own research, tell us a little bit about that journey from being an undergraduate to where you are now in your current role.
So, going back to doing this BA, the person who introduced us to corpus linguistics was Claude Sonis. So he was focusing on English for scientific purposes and compiled corpora of scientific English. And then later on, so that's when I was first acquainted with corpus linguistics. Then later on, when I decided to do a PhD, I chose Cardiff specifically because PhD candidates could do a diploma where they learnt about quantitative and qualitative research methods used in linguistics. And we had, I'm sure you will know Gordon Tucker. So Gordon was delivering a module called Lexis, if I remember well. And that's again something I was really interested in finding out more about because of what I'd experienced on the BA. And then if you fast forward a few years after I finished a PhD, I very much wanted, so that's about, that's over 10 years ago, I very much wanted to find a way of combining corpus methods and discourse analytic methods. And that's when I started working as a research fellow on Guy Cook and Alison Seeley's project on the discursive representation of animals. So, the people, products, pests and pets project. So yes, so it's there's stages to how I've come to find out more about corpus linguistics, and then obviously I started working as a researcher.
Yeah, I think your work on that project with Guy and Alison was probably around the time that I first encountered you in the sort of corpus conferences scene, if you will, and things like that. So yes, I remember we could spend hours talking about that project alone in and of itself, because I remember seeing all sorts of really interesting things coming from that too. I will now, of course, move to Insa. As I said, I'm not going to ask you yet about corpus linguistics specifically, but similarly, I'd like to hear a bit about your own academic journey and how you came into the position that you have now.
Thank you very much, Robbie. I should just say before we start that I am no longer head of department. So I handed that role over in 2022 to a wonderful colleague.
Okay, that's fine.
Much appreciate your introduction.
Well, you were head of department anyway, so
right. Yes. So I started in an entirely or another different discipline. I started out in economics. I did my first degree in economics at the Free University of Berlin. And I was really interested in development economics, and then had the chance to spend a year in Nigeria as an exchange student. And it was in Nigeria itself that I actually began to have doubt, because my experience on the ground of what people did and how they experienced economic life, so to speak, did not really link at all with the theories that I had been taught about. And so when I completed my degree, I looked very much for a more interdisciplinary environment to sort of pursue my interest in Nigeria, which really became a country that has fascinated me ever since. And that attracted me to the University of Birmingham, where I did my PhD at what was then an interdisciplinary center dedicated to the study of Africa, or West Africa even, the Center of West African Studies. And I had a postdoc in Oxford, but then returned to Birmingham. We have since developed a stronger focus on anthropology as a core discipline for sort of research on Africa, but we remain that strong interdisciplinary interest. However, we do not have any corpus linguists on the team, and that obviously led to the collaboration across departments and institutions between Clyde and myself.
And we will get to that very shortly as the main focus of today's episode. Firstly, though, I think for the benefit of those listening who I hope are probably quite familiar with linguistics and corpus linguistics, but may not be so familiar with whatever interdisciplinary application we're discussing each episode, in this case, anthropology. Insa, I read on your profile online that you say that your research straddles history and anthropology mainly. Broadly speaking, what are the interests of an anthropologist as distinct from, say, a historian, for instance?
Well, anthropologists are really interested in life from the bottom up. That means that most anthropological research takes place in the present, partly because while there are some very sort of complex theoretical debates that have shaped our discipline and that sometimes offer links to other disciplines, we are really also distinguished by a very particular research method, and that is called participant observation. So anthropologists spend a long time with the people they research. They often also learn the languages of the people they study, and they try to become a part of these groups that they study. So in many cases, anthropologists work in non-European or marginalized societies. So there's a very long tradition of being quite sympathetic towards the groups that we study. Of course, not in all cases, but broadly. And we are interested in language as an expression of ways of thinking and reasoning. But if we are, then we often look at language as one of several sort of sources of data. So we would also look at unspoken communication, social relations, more broadly relations of power, gender relations, but also aspects like art and creativity, ritual, music, or religion.
And you obviously you mentioned that you spent some time in Nigeria, and this struck you as a particularly sort of interesting place to explore some of the issues that you'd been working on. The project we're talking on specifically today is the Knowing Each Other project. Everyday religious encounters, social identities, and tolerance in Southwest Nigeria. I wonder if you could say more about the context behind this. You mentioned already, being there and seeing from an economic perspective that the way things were actually happening were not quite as perhaps theorized. So maybe you could say more, and also on the religious aspect of what sort of drew you to this place in this context.
I guess I have several ways of starting to answer this. So first of all, the project was funded by the European Research Council, so I remain very grateful for their sort of generous support of it. Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa. It's also a major oil exporter, so it's quite important politically. It's one of really the most important African countries. But it's not unique in the sense of its religious composition. Like many African countries, like many countries around the world, it has a religiously mixed population. And like many countries around the world, it has also experienced its share of religious conflict between Muslims and Christians, but also between different Muslim groups and to a lesser degree between different Christian groups. I'm just thinking of Boko Haram, terrorism in northern Nigeria around Lake Chad that some of your viewers may have heard about. However, in the southwest of Nigeria, Yoruba speakers converted to both Islam and Christianity, and there Muslims and Christians actually live quite closely together and also intermarry. So it offers us, in a way, a unique environment in which we can study the absence of conflict. That is itself quite a challenge because we have quite a lot of methods and established ways of studying conflict, or religious conflict. While Southwest Nigeria is not the only part of the world where Muslims and Christians resolve issues quickly so that they normally don't turn into large problems, it is one where this phenomenon is sort of very pronounced and offered an opportunity to think more broadly about the possibility of positive relations between Muslims and Christians and members of different religions more generally.
And you said that anthropologists tend to use a sort of range of approaches, including, as you said, becoming part of the communities that they're studying. And I believe that part of this project involved quite a large, almost like a door-to-door survey, going around and speaking to people. And we'll get onto the corpus part in a moment. I know that this is sort of part of where Clyde became involved. But before we get to that, on a practical level, I wonder if you could say more about what this actually involved. How many of you were there on the team, and how long did this take? And tell us a bit of the sort of there and then in the moment, how this actually worked in practice, because it sounds on paper to be a huge task.
Yeah, thank you. I should probably say that carrying out surveys is actually not something that many anthropologists do at this moment in time, although in the past it was sort of a part of the toolkit that was more frequently used. And one of the reasons I decided to do a survey was that my on-the-ground experience clashed somewhat with a lot of the literature that was published at the time about rising tensions between Muslims and Christians sort of across the board. And I just said, well, where I live, that isn't the case. And it was just very difficult at that point to actually convince people that this was relevant for a large section of the population. So a survey seemed a reasonable way of addressing the issue, also because there hadn't really been a survey of religious identification in the region since the 1960s. So Africa is affected by data poverty in that sense. And we thought it would be very good to change that. And when I say we, I mean my wonderful colleague Olukoya Ogen at Osun State University in Nigeria, who worked with me as the Nigerian team leader on this project. On average, we often had a team of about 20 people in a location where we did a survey, about 10 to 12 people who knew the survey, whom we had trained, and then often another 8 or 10 people who'd help us to get in touch with local stakeholders, local government, chair people, traditional rulers or chiefs, and also sometimes the heads of compounds who'd give us permission to do this research. And these sort of local team members also helped us to avoid misunderstandings. So in some cases, people thought that we were, coming to collect their taxes, or that we were representatives of some religious authority that wanted to check whether they did things properly. So it helped a lot to have people on the team who were known locally and who could reassure our respondents. We didn't really have a statistical base. So what we did especially in smaller cities, is to start from the marketplace and walk outwards into different directions of the settlement, and then contacting, every other or every fourth house, depending on the size of the cities, and taking left or right turns at intervals that we'd agreed on, in the hope of randomizing responses.
I just wanted to ask what you said before about maybe misconceptions of what the purpose of the survey was and what you're doing. I mean, what kind of response, in terms of, you're asking them about their religious identity, and that for some people can be quite a deeply personal thing to talk about. And so did you find, well, obviously you did find in the end plenty of people who were very happy to tell you about it, but was there a portion of people who were not at all interested in talking to you about this sort of thing?
We had several encounters where people did not want to speak to us because, or at first didn't want to speak to us. In most cases, they did agree eventually, often because they thought we were government representatives. But in one case, I remember we came to a compound where people were very worried that we had come to check up on whether they were good Muslims. And actually suspected us of being in touch with terrorists or violent groups. So it took us some time to convince them that, we were obviously not there to check up on anything. And one of the things that helped us was that we had a team that was made up of Muslims and Christians, but traditional religious practice is also quite important in the area still. And in order to encourage all forms of expression, we had also practiced with all our team members the singing of songs that celebrated traditional religion. So in that case, we actually demonstrated that we were not prejudiced against people who also, perhaps in addition to Islam, engaged in traditional practices by singing that song.
Goodness me, that's incredible. This is fascinating, and I could ask you so much more about that aspect alone. But I want to move on, and the project as a whole, has had a range of outputs, and of course the focus today is on the element of the research that was looking at language and involved corpus linguistics, and of course this is where Clyde comes in. Thank you, Clyde, for patiently listening to Insa and I rapporting on at each other. I do want to ask you now, of course, that perhaps a little bit later, after the survey data was collected, you became involved, and the two of you, along with another colleague of yours, Rebecca Jones, have published research analyzing the survey data using corpus methods. Clyde, how did you come to be aware of this project, and how did you end up becoming involved yourself?
This is, my answer is probably going to make you laugh, but anyway, I'll be truthful. So when I finished my PhD, I was looking for work. I wanted to work as a research fellow, research assistant. So I was going through job adverts, and I stumbled across the job advert to work as a research assistant on Insa's project. And it was one of these situations where I knew I couldn't get the job, because not least because it required some level of proficiency in Yoruba. But it really caught my eye, and I thought, what an interesting project. So I got in touch with Insa. I'm not too sure. We must have emailed and then agreed to speak over the phone. Obviously, I couldn't apply because of this. The fact that I didn't have the right profile. But during the conversation, Insa mentioned that they were going to conduct a large-scale, survey, etc., to which we started. I mentioned corpus linguistic methods of analyzing large quantities of text-based data, etc. And to cut a long story short, Insa seemed really interested, to which she said, okay, I'll get back to you once we've started collecting data, bearing in mind at the time, Rebecca, who was the research assistant working on the project, she hadn't been hired yet. And Insa did get back in touch. I mean, you might want to add your version of the story, Insa. And that's when she got back. Obviously, I was working then on the People, Products, Pest and Pets project, and I started working on the project as a research methods consultant. So that was how, yeah.
Okay, so that's it's good that you mentioned that actually, because Insa, I wanted to ask whether it was the case that you had already identified, I need a corpus linguist, I'm going to look for one, or rather, as it seems to be, I need somebody who can look at the language, but and maybe agnostic about how exactly that might happen. And then it was Clyde who said, well, corpus linguistics would really help with this sort of stuff. How is your memory of how this came to be?
Well, perhaps even slightly different still. So at the time, I was just really interested in collecting as much data as possible. And I think I hadn't fully grasped how difficult it would be to manage this data. So in the survey, we asked people about their own attitudes to religion, their religious history, their parents, their grandparents. And we also asked them about things like, if you're a Christian, do you go to mosque? If you are, a Muslim, do you go to church? Do you sometimes participate in traditional events and so on? And then after every question, to avoid just boring yes or no answers, we asked people to explain. So by the time we started to enter the data of about 2,800 respondents, we realized that we had an amount of text from these free text responses that we actually couldn't handle. And of course, at first we thought, well, we'll look at interesting cases, and follow them up. And we did that too. So we have some really wonderful individual case studies. However, it was then that I thought, corpus linguistics might offer an answer. And I must honestly admit that I had no idea what it could do, really. I mean, Rebecca Jones had a better understanding because she was a literature graduate, and was actually quite excited by the possibility. And so I got back in touch with Clyde after our original conversation. And what we did for about 2 years was that Clyde basically prepared little learning exercises for us, so that we started to form a view of what we might finally do with the data once it was entered.
Wow, that's I say this completely tongue in cheek that couldn't possibly find any corpus linguists at the University of Birmingham, who might have been able to help as well. Yeah.
We did actually have some help from colleagues in Birmingham at many points, but it was just Clyde's interest in the actual research that made it such a delightful experience, really.
Yeah, so it does sound like a really wonderful collaboration. Clyde, I wanted to ask you in what condition or format was the data in when you first got it? Because we've got all of this stuff obviously being done, handwritten responses on bits of paper. How did you receive the data, and did you, how big was your headache when you sort of realized what you'd need to do to get it in a format ready for corpus analysis? I've had this moment a few times in various projects where you sort of, oh my God. So what was that situation for you in this case?
Well, I'll give you an idea. So obviously when we met again, the initial conversation we had, it wasn't long enough for me to get a sense of how big the data set would be. So it turned out that there were very many open-ended questions in the survey data. But it also, and roughly to give you an idea of the size of the corpus, some of the answers were in Yoruba, some of the answers were in English, and it were roughly of equal size, so 450,000 words each. And we decided, as you know, for our publication so far, to focus on the answers in English only. But the data at the time was in an Excel sheet, but also there were you have to, and this I wasn't involved in, but Rebecca and Insa were coordinating a team of transcribers. So to give you an idea, we had the word Christian, for example, which is fairly central which was fairly central in the research for obvious reasons, was spelt in 21 different ways. So so there was quite a fairly long process of standardizing spelling, but not in the way that we would usually think of standardization from a corpus linguistic perspective. It really had to do with the nature of the data that had been gathered. And because of the format as well, it meant, because really, although we had this initial conversation, the project wasn't run with corpus linguistics in mind. Like Insa was saying, when they approached me, it was, okay, we know corpus linguistics might help. What is it? So that meant we needed to find some ways of formatting the data set in a way that would be palatable for corpus tools we might be using. So we involved Akira Murakami, who we might know. So he was then a research fellow on, ironically, on a project that looked at interdisciplinary research discourse, which was led by Susan Hunston and Paul Thompson. And so he wrote a script that allowed us to extract the data, but also later on to apply a range of filters to, let's say, compile subcorpora of the answers by, let's say, Muslim respondents, Christian respondents, traditionalist respondents, looking at, the gender of respondents, etc. So that's I'm making it sound a lot easier probably than what it was. But yes, in some ways I didn't have much to do because of the involvement of Akira, who wrote this script, and then all I had to do is to run this script to then compile subcorpora.
And I know that this project is multifaceted, but I wonder, Clyde, whether you could give a flavor of specifically of what the corpus elements of analyzing the survey data helped to reveal about the broader questions that the project was asking around interreligious relations, and what are there any sort of broad themes that emerged, I suppose, with the help of being able to access this data using corpus linguistic methods?
It's probably, I'll start the answer, but I think Insa would be better placed to really, give you a sense of how useful corpus linguistic methods were. But just perhaps it might be worth mentioning, those stages during which we, because the project was very much interdisciplinary right from the start. But what that meant, and we articulate it, really clearly in our writing, is that it took time. So we didn't just, it was really a matter of us sitting together and, for example, looking at some of the corpus outputs. We can, go back to this later, for example, but looking at the corpus outputs and seeing what I would see in comparison to what Insa and Rebecca would see. And sorry for the division here, but our disciplinary backgrounds meant that we paid attention to different things, but also, their knowledge of the data and obviously their knowledge of interreligious relations in Yoruba land meant that they could see things that I wouldn't see, but vice versa in some ways. So I'll give you an example. And this is obviously after me really getting acquainted with the survey, what was asked, what was the bigger picture, etc. So some of the things that lived outside of the data. So hence the reason why I'm saying this was a really long process. But the one example that really stood out for me, so we sat down and looked at various kinds of corpus outputs, was when we looked at n-grams. I believe it was 4 grams. And so I compiled, a list of 4 grams, and I'd bring it, and then I'd show actually how I went about compiling them. And I just really remember to this day how excited I thought it was. Fairly exciting, but I'm not going to hide it. I didn't, compared to other things we'd looked at, I was mildly. The excitement of Insa and Rebecca was really interesting for me, because what they saw, so one of the 4 grams was "I do not like." They were able to interpret that 4 gram in a way that I would, I'd focus on other 4 grams, which they'd found interesting. But so we really learned about the data. So this was, for example, about, how the boundaries that people who practice, the religions that we've mentioned, the boundaries, their personal boundaries, and how they express that in the survey. But I think at this stage I should probably let Insa talk about those themes from her point of view.
Absolutely, yes. If you don't mind, Insa, I'm sure skipping a million stages in the lifespan of this project, for purposes of the time we have. What were some of the sort of big findings or main kind of observations that you made on the basis of your work together?
So for me, the engagement with the corpus methods really, I think, led to a quicker realization of what kind of data we had, or what the data told us. Because of the difficulties of calibrating our data, I mean, there are, say the Nigerian Office of Statistics and the World Bank don't even agree on the numbers of Nigerians, so that made it quite difficult. We were very skeptical and worried about one of our early findings, numerical findings from the survey, which was that there were far more women who were Christians than men, and far more men who were Muslims than women. And we usually think about religious groups as kind of coherent communities, right? You have Muslim families, you have Christian families. And yes, we were aware there was some intermarriage, but we didn't expect that kind of asymmetry. And so we did spend quite a lot of time sort of thinking through, looking for other data to calibrate our own, and we couldn't work out where we had made a mistake. And we were really worried. And so as we worked on statistical modeling on the survey, we were also doing the kind of playing and learning about corpus methods. And one of the things that was really striking in the both in the, say, key lemmas and in the n-grams was the importance of family-related terms. So terms that pointed at gender relations and at interpersonal relations. And it was when we saw that in the language that we actually thought that maybe we hadn't made a mistake, that maybe the survey data that we had really reflected something very important. And so the focus on gender that then arose from this was not at all planned in the original project. And while we have since found, for example, unpublished data that has allowed us to calibrate and to be more confident in our own findings, just having this insight there from our respondents' responses itself that we got through corpus methods, I'm sure, shortened the time it would normally have taken us to get to the insight that we finally got to. So for me, that is really the most startling insight, that, in a context where a survey revealed something really unexpected, this was confirmed through our corpus data, and therefore allowed us just to be confident in this data earlier, and to reach out to others, which of course you wouldn't do if you're still worried that your own data is really tainted somehow.
Yeah, and you I think from what both of you are saying is that this truly sounds like a collaboration where both of you have almost taught each other something in a way, and it's you talk about this explicitly in the corporate paper. You say that we consider the type of corpus linguistic work presented in this article has much to offer beyond the disciplinary boundaries of corpus linguistics, which is obviously something that we're seeing ever increasingly, the further extension of the reach of corpus linguistics into other disciplines, beyond the study of language. But also, more interestingly, you say, without our anthropological knowledge, the findings of our corpus analyses might have been easily misinterpreted. So I suppose that, Clyde, your role was to help ensure that the findings from the corpus side were not misinterpreted, right?
And vice versa. I'm tempted to say. So really, if you think it, and I guess our work really illustrates this distinction, which is not always established between interdisciplinary work and cross-disciplinary work. So cross-disciplinary, which you'll understand as, it's okay for the people involved to work in silos and not necessarily interact with each other, and this kind of research is valuable in its own way. But true interdisciplinarity means that you're trying to put the disciplines in conversation with each other. So when it comes to corpus linguistic work, for example, what we're trying to convey in how we're reporting findings, in how we're formulating our interpretations, etc., is that we wouldn't be without the corpus linguistics. So in this instance, myself being in conversation with people who have a really intimate knowledge of the corpus, it would be very difficult to arrive at the same findings, which therefore means that that what we feel strongly about is that whenever that's not, whenever a corpus linguist is not responsible for the data that's being looked at, that really efforts should be made to find out from the people who have a better, deeper, thorough understanding of this data to come on board. And when it's not possible, to really acknowledge that, therefore the findings might be, the interpretations might be limited and possibly at times erroneous. The examples I was giving about the n-grams were precisely about this. It was interesting that what I was noticing was catching Insa and Rebecca's attention, and what they were noticing was also catching my attention. But it's those conversations that then made us come up with interpretations at times of the survey data that wouldn't have been possible if we hadn't sat down and discussed these together.
Well, it sounds like it's been, very fulfilling and fascinating for both of you and your colleagues who've worked on this project as well. And I think we're seeing, so many examples, as I mentioned, of, corpus linguistics really crossing these disciplinary boundaries. And I think, Clyde, those final words are very much words of wisdom, and really important. And I'm going to keep you in the hot seat, Clyde, as we draw today's episode to a close with my usual quick questions section, which guests probably have come to dread as we've been going on. 3 quick questions coming to you, all about corpus linguistics, to draw things to a close. So if you're ready, Clyde, we'll get started with the first one. Okay.
I'm
quick
ready.
Question number 1. What is the biggest change you've noticed in corpus research during your career?
Well, it's probably, if you think about early work in corpus linguistics, that move away from, it seems that originally work in corpus linguistics was about finding out, understanding better language. Whereas if you look at a lot of the corpus linguistic work now, it's a lot more about using corpora to understand better the social world. So I think that's a significant change from my point of view.
And the second question here is maybe forcing you not to sit on the fence. We'll see. Corpus linguistics, method or theory?
That's a blast from the past
Yes.
question, taking me
Yeah.
back to early. I'd say if we look at the nature of my work, probably more a method, because I've been looking at how to combine corpus methods with methods from discourse analysis and then anthropology in my interdisciplinary work. I've had some really interesting conversations with Insa about this. It's been interesting actually to hear what a non-linguist, how they might think differently.
Take note that is a bit of an old school question. I think it's both really in
Yeah.
varying ways, but yes. Final question: looking ahead, how will corpus linguistics make an impact on the world in the future?
Am I allowed to mention two things very briefly?
Yes, you are.
Yes, I am. I force you into this. Well, the first, I'm foreseeing that there'll be more work where corpus linguistics is informing research in other disciplines, so informing work research in other disciplines, and the second, I'm trying to keep it short. And the second point I'd like to mention here, which I feel really strongly about because of my work with Insa and Rebecca, but also into multilingual education in the Gambia, is I'm very much hoping that corpus linguists will continue investing time to explore languages which have received little attention or haven't received attention. That tends to be because of issues around code switching or because they've recently been developed, and therefore there might be inconsistencies in terms of spelling, in terms of truncating words or phrases. And that's something that we want to be doing, for example, with the Yoruba data. So we've already compiled a corpus of Yoruba in collaboration with Sketch Engine. So the idea would be to look at the nuances, and this is something we've talked about. So there seems to be the thrust of the answers, the ideas that we've looked at seems to be similar based on Insa and Rebecca's insights into the Yoruba and English data. But there seems to be nuances that we'd be able to reveal, and also specific aspects of language use by Yoruba speakers in terms of how they might express certain ideas in Yoruba in comparison to English. So that, I feel quite strongly about that, and I feel quite strongly as well about developing corpora of languages that are where there's little linguistic research that's been conducted on them, and that very much applies to the languages spoken in the Gambia. So I'm exploring possibilities with colleagues there as well.
Well, it certainly seems to at least have started moving in that direction with a diversification of languages and multilingual contexts as well that are being explored with corpus methods. So indeed, and best of luck with the next phase of this work as well. We will draw things to a close there. So thank you both, Clyde and Insa, for your time today. It's been really, really fascinating to talk with you both about your work. And of course, to our viewers and listeners, thank you for joining us for this episode of CorpusCast. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on whichever podcast player is of your choice. It's funny that Clyde just mentioned Sketch Engine, actually, because for our next episode, our guest is the CEO of Lexical Computing, the company that develops Sketch Engine, Dr. Miloš Jakubicek. He'll be joining me for the next episode to talk all about the story of Sketch Engine and the role that he plays in developing that tool that is used by so many people to do corpus research and teaching around the world. So we'll be looking forward to that in the next episode. In the meantime, please do let us know your thoughts using the hashtag CorpusCast, and make sure to check out the Aston Corpus Linguistics Research Group on Twitter at Aston Corpus, and you can follow me at Lovermob. CorpusCast is an Aston Originals podcast written and hosted by me, Robbie Love, and produced by my esteemed colleague from our press and communications team, Sam Cook. Thanks again. Thank you again, Clyde and Insa. It's such a pleasure to speak with you. And we'll see you soon again on the next episode of CorpusCast. Goodbye.